Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time. Today we're diving into Waking Up, a book that helps us understand one of the most fundamental systems of all, the cognitive process that creates our sense of self. You know, that voice in your head, the feeling that there is an I living inside there. And what we're going to see is that understanding how that system actually works, well, it can change just about everything.
All right, let's get into it. First things first, Waking Up is not a religious book. It's a totally rational investigation by Sam Harris, who is a neuroscientist and philosopher, into the nature of our own consciousness. He basically treats spirituality like a field of science, a space where we can actually make discoveries about our own minds without any dogma attached.
So, what's the core problem that the book is really trying to solve? It's what you could call our mind's default setting, that almost constant state of being completely lost in thought. It's so normal for us, we barely even realize it's happening.
And this gets us to the central mystery of the whole thing. We all have this incredibly strong, persistent feeling of being a self, a little person looking out from behind our eyes. But this book asks a pretty wild question. What if, when you really look for it, that I just isn't there?
Harris calls this default state a neurotic trance, and you know exactly what he means. It's that nonstop internal monologue, right? We're constantly replaying past conversations, planning for the future, basically narrating our own lives to ourselves. We get so wrapped up in that stream of thought that we're almost never truly in the present moment.
So where does this ghost in the machine even come from? This inner chatter feels like it has an owner, a thinker, an ego, the I that's at the very center of our experience. And let's be really specific about what we mean by self. We're not talking about your body or your personality. We're talking about that very particular feeling of being a pilot in the cockpit of your head, steering the whole thing. It's that presumed center of consciousness that all of your experiences seem to be happening to. And here it is, the book's main argument, laid right out. Harris says that this deeply real feeling of being a separate self is in fact a cognitive illusion. And the critical point is this: when you actually go looking for this I, both in the brain and in your own direct experience, you just can't find it. Okay, so if it's an illusion, why does it feel so ridiculously persistent? Well, because it's not a static thing we're looking for. It's an active process, a self-reinforcing loop that our brain is running all the time, completely unconsciously. So here's how that whole system works, step by step. It all starts when a thought just appears in your mind, seemingly from nowhere. The loop kicks in the second we grab onto that thought and identify with it. We think, that's my thought. That very act of identification creates the feeling of a thinker, an I. And then, of course, that I has another thought, and on it goes, building the ego moment by moment. Now, I know this can sound a little abstract, but to make it more concrete, Harris uses a really fantastic visual metaphor for how we can experience our own minds. And this just lays it out perfectly. Most of the time, we're using our consciousness like a mirror. We're just completely lost in our own reflection, obsessed with the story of me. But there's another way. We can use consciousness like a window. Instead of being caught up in the reflection, we can just look through the glass and see the world as it is, as a witness to our experience. So what does that actually look like in practice? What really happens when we manage to shift our view from the mirror to the window? I mean, just think about it for a second. We're always talking to ourselves in our heads. It's the most familiar, constant feature of our entire lives. But if there's a voice talking, who or what is hearing it? The simple fact that you can be aware of that inner voice proves that you aren't that voice. It's just another thing appearing in consciousness, like a sound or a sensation. So when you really start to see this cognitive system for what it is, a few things become incredibly clear. The self isn't a solid thing. It's a process, a kind of thought loop. Neurologically, scientists can't find a single spot in the brain that's the CEO. And getting this isn't just a neat intellectual trick. Recognizing it directly can actually cut through a ton of unnecessary psychological suffering. So ultimately, this explainer leaves us with the same provocative question that Waking Up wants us to explore for ourselves. What happens to things like anxiety and anger and our feeling of being separate from everything when we stop identifying with the voice in our head and instead just learn to watch our thoughts come and go? That shift in perception, well, that's what this is all about. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For longer audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.